They mocked the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. The transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the docking floor of Varen Station. Steam burst from the landing legs. The lights inside the dock were cold and blue, and everything smelled like metal and recycled air. The station was massive, a rotating ring of steel and alloy floating between two dead moons at the edge of Krellian space. It was not a pretty place. It was not meant to be. It was a military training base, and it had one job: to turn raw recruits into coalition soldiers. Sue stepped off the ramp with her bag over one shoulder and her orders in her hand. She was not tall. She was not built like a warrior. She had dark eyes, short black hair, and the kind of face that looked younger than it was. She wore the standard gray recruit uniform, the same one every new soldier received on their first day. Hers fit a little too loose at the shoulders. There were aliens everywhere. A group of Velhari stood near the east wall, four-armed, gray-skinned, with necks twice as long as a human's. They were already watching her. A pair of Dronai walked past, their mechanical legs clicking on the floor, their blank silver faces tilted slightly in her direction. 3 Krellians, tall, scaled, and built like moving walls, stood together near the check-in post. One of them said something in a low voice. The others made a sound that Sue's translator rendered as laughter. She kept walking. The check-in officer was a Krellian with a flat, bored expression. He looked at her orders, looked at her, and then looked at her orders again. "Human," he said. It was not a question. "Recruit Sue," she said, "reporting for assignment." He typed something into his console. "Bay 9, bottom bunk, gear locker 42. He slid her a keycard without looking up. "Training starts at 5th rotation. Don't be late." She took the keycard. "Thank you." He did not respond. Bay 9 turned out to be a long room with metal bunks stacked 3 high on both sides. It smelled like sweat and equipment oil. When Sue pushed the door open, every head turned. There were 11 other recruits already inside. 2 Velhari, 4 Krellians, 3 Dronai, 1 creature she didn't recognize, something with 6 legs and a wide flat head covered in small orange spines, and 1 other, a thin alien with pale blue skin and large dark eyes, sitting alone on an upper bunk, who looked at Sue with what seemed like genuine curiosity. The rest did not look curious. They looked unimpressed. Sue found bunk 42 at the very back of the room, near the ventilation shaft. It was the bottom bunk, which meant anyone on the middle or top bunk above her could, and likely would, disturb her sleep. The locker next to it had a dent in the door that made it hard to close all the way. She set her bag down and started unpacking quietly. One of the Krellians walked over. He was big, even by Krellian standards, with dark green scales and a long scar running from his left eye to the corner of his jaw. His name badge read Deho. He was not a recruit. The single gold R on his collar said he was a senior officer, a training commander. He stood and looked at her for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "You are the human." "Yes, sir," Sue said. "I have trained 47 recruit groups on this station," Deho said. "I have trained Velhari, Dronai, Krellians, Tharsi, even a Makori once. I have never trained a human." He paused. "I have also never had a recruit who would lose a fight against standard atmospheric pressure." A few recruits in the room made sounds. Laughter, again. Sue's translator caught most of it. She folded her second uniform and placed it in the locker. "I'll try not to disappoint, sir," she said. Deho looked at her a moment longer, then turned and walked away. The first week was difficult in ways Sue had expected, and humiliating in ways she had not. The physical drills were designed for alien bodies. The strength tests used resistance levels built around Krellian muscle density. The reflex courses were timed for species with faster neural response than humans. Sue finished last in almost everything. Not far last. She pushed herself every single time. But last. The other recruits noticed. Nari was a Velhari female, and she was not openly cruel. She simply never acknowledged Sue's presence unless she had to. Junho was a young Krellian, the smallest in the group, who laughed loudest whenever Sue fell behind during drills. A Dronai recruit the others called Unit 7 didn't laugh, because Dronai didn't laugh. But it did record everything, and Sue had a feeling those recordings were being shared. Deho ran her through extra drills on the third day. He said it was adjustment training. The other recruits called it something else when they thought she couldn't hear. Her translator caught that too. On the fifth day, during a gravity resistance run, a course that simulated 3 different gravity levels across 1 kilometer, Sue fell at the second transition point. The gravity shifted too fast, her legs buckled, and she hit the floor hard. She lay there for a second, breathing, staring up at the ceiling. Junho ran past her. He didn't slow down. The humans sent their weakest, he said without looking at her, and kept running. Sue got up. But she finished. That night, she sat on her thin mattress and looked at the ceiling while everyone else slept. She was sore in places she hadn't known could be sore. Her knuckles were scraped from a wall climb drill. Her left knee ached from the fall. She was exhausted in a way that sleep alone wouldn't fix. But she was not broken. She had read about Varen Station before she applied. She had read about the Coalition's mixed species training program, about the dropout rates, about the species that had tried and left. She had read about the instructors and their methods. She had read everything she could find. She had also read about Bay 7. Everyone on the station knew about Bay 7. It was at the bottom of the station's lower level, behind 2 security doors and a warning sign in 7 languages. Nobody went there unless ordered. Even the station's maintenance crew avoided it when they could. Something the Coalition kept but could not control. Sue had read about that too. She turned onto her side, closed her eyes, and listened to the hum of the ventilation shaft. She would deal with the drills. She would deal with Deho and Junho and the rest of them. But she kept thinking about Bay 7. They mocked the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. Bay 7 did not appear on the standard station map given to new recruits. It was not listed in the orientation files. It was not mentioned during the first day briefing, or the second, or the third. The only reason most recruits even knew it existed was because of the sound. It came at night, usually. A low vibrating sound, like something very large pressing against a wall that was not quite strong enough to hold it. It traveled up through the floors, through the bunks, through the soles of your boots if you were standing still long enough. It was not a roar. It was not a scream. It was something worse than both, a sound that had no clean name, that sat somewhere between a warning and a promise. The first time Sue heard it, she sat up in her bunk. The recruit above her, a Krellian named Bora, had gone completely still. Across the room, Junho had his eyes open and was staring at the ceiling. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The sound faded after about 30 seconds, and then the room slowly, carefully, went back to pretending to sleep. In the morning, Sue asked Nari what the sound was. Nari looked at her for a moment. "You don't want to know," she said, and walked away. Sue asked one of the Dronai units instead. Unit 7's faceplate rotated slightly, which Sue had learned meant it was processing whether to answer. Then it said, in its flat, even voice, "The entity in Bay 7 is classified as a Vorkai. Species designation, Apex class, threat rating, maximum. It is currently the only known living Vorkai in Coalition custody. Further details are restricted." "Restricted how?" Sue asked. "Restricted in the way that means you should not ask further," Unit 7 said, and walked away. so Sue looked it up herself. The station's general library terminal had very little on Vorkai. Most of the files were locked behind clearance levels she didn't have. But there were fragments, old incident reports, a few lines in a xenobiology overview, a single photograph that someone had clearly not meant to leave in the public archive. The photograph showed a corridor. The corridor had a reinforced door at the end of it. The door had been torn partially off its frame. The edges of the tear were smooth, which meant whatever had done it had not struggled. On the floor of the corridor, there were 3 Coalition security uniforms. They were empty. The caption under the photograph said, "Varan Station, lower level, Incident 714. All personnel evacuated. Handlers reassigned." Reassigned. That was one word for it. The Vorakai had a name. It was in the system, buried under 3 access warnings. The name was Rho. Just Rho. No unit number, no species tag attached to the name, the way there was for most Coalition assets. Just the one word. Like whoever had written the file had decided that anything more would be unnecessary. Like Rho was the only thing that needed to be said. Sue read everything she could find. It took her 3 evenings of library time to piece it together. Rho had been brought to Varan Station 9 years ago. Before that, Rho had been part of a deep space containment operation, a joint mission between 4 Coalition species to capture a Vorakai that had been destroying automated mining platforms in the Keth Belt. It had taken 11 ships, a coordinated ambush, and a specialized containment vessel to bring Rho in. 2 of the 11 ships had not come back. The containment vessel had needed complete rebuilding after delivery. The Coalition had wanted to study Rho, maybe use Rho, if anyone could figure out how. Vorkai were not just strong, they were terrifyingly intelligent. They were ambush hunters by nature, capable of learning behavior patterns, identifying weak points in structures, and adapting to new environments within hours of arrival. They had no natural predators. They had never needed any. The entire evolutionary history of the Vorkai was basically one long story about everything else in their ecosystem learning to stay away from them. The problem was that nobody could handle Rho. The first handler lasted 4 days. She was a Velhari specialist, with 15 years of experience working with dangerous alien fauna. On the 4th day, Rho tore the inner wall of the enclosure open and walked into the corridor. The handler activated containment protocol. Rho ignored it. Rho let her go, turned around, walked back into the enclosure, and sat down. Nobody could explain why. The second handler was a Krellian. He lasted 6 days before he requested immediate reassignment. His report said only, "This animal understands me better than I understand it." That is not a comfortable situation. There had been 9 handlers in 9 years. Some left on their own. Some had to be pulled out after Rho damaged the enclosure during their sessions. One had apparently tried to use a disciplinary stimulus device, a tool used to train large dangerous creatures, and Rho had responded by methodically destroying every monitoring camera in the bay, one by one, over the following 3 days, as if making a point. After the 9th handler left, the Coalition stopped assigning new ones. Rho was fed by automated systems. Nobody went down there unless something broke, and when something broke, the maintenance crew drew short straws to decide who had to go. The enclosure itself was something. 6-inch reinforced alloy walls, a double-door airlock entry, electromagnetic field emitters running around the full perimeter, motion sensors, atmospheric sensors, audio sensors. The whole bay had been rebuilt twice. The current version was the 3rd design, each one heavier and more reinforced than the last. And still, sometimes at night, the sound came up through the floors. Sue closed the library terminal on the 3rd evening, and sat for a moment in the small chair, thinking. She thought about what she had read. She thought about the empty uniforms in the photograph, and the smooth edges of the torn door. She thought, about 9 handlers in 9 years, each one leaving or being pulled before they ever really got anywhere. She thought about why. All 9 handlers had been from species with natural threat responses, species that produced fear chemicals, compounds that changed the smell of the air around them, that were picked up by sensitive biological receptors. Velhari, Krelian, Dronai, all of them had some version of it. When they were afraid, their bodies said so, loudly, in ways that had nothing to do with what their mouths were doing. And a Vorkai, an apex predator with millions of years of hunting evolution behind it, would feel that, would read it, would respond to it. Fear was the only language every handler had ever brought into that room. Sue sat with that thought for a while. Then she got up, went back to Bay 9, and lay down on her thin mattress. Above her, Bora shifted in his bunk. Down the hall, somewhere far below, the sound came again. Low, vibrating, patient. Sue listened to it until it stopped. She was thinking about Bay 7. She was thinking about the lower level, the 2 security doors, the warning sign in 7 languages. She was thinking about a creature that had been alone down there for 9 years, that had broken every attempt to reach it, that had never once been understood. She was not afraid. That, she was starting to think, might matter more than anyone realized. They mocked the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. It started on a Tuesday, by the station's standard calendar, or at least, that was the first time anyone else noticed. Sue had been going to the lower level for 5 days before Nari saw her. It was not something Sue had planned carefully or announced. She had simply, one evening after drills, taken the long corridor to the lower stairwell instead of heading back to Bay 9. She had passed the first security door. It was unlocked during non-restricted hours for maintenance access, and walked down the second hallway, and stopped outside the second door, the one with the warning sign in 7 languages, and stood there for a while. She had not opened the door that first day. She had just stood outside it, listened. The sound was different from up close. It was not the low vibration she heard through the floors at night. It was quieter than that. A slow, heavy rhythm, like something very large pacing. Back and forth, the same path, over and over. There was something in that rhythm that was not rage. It was something older than rage. Something that had gone past rage a long time ago and come out the other side into something that had no good word. She stood there for about 10 minutes. Then she went back upstairs. The second day, she went again. This time she stood closer to the door. The pacing continued. She did not speak. She did not do anything. She just existed near the door, breathing steadily, heart rate normal, no adrenaline spike, no tightening in the chest. After 15 minutes, the pacing slowed, just slightly. Then it picked back up. She went back upstairs. The third day, the pacing slowed again when she arrived. This time, it stayed slower for a few minutes before returning to its normal rhythm. She filed it away. The fourth day, she spoke. She did not say anything important. She talked about the drills. She talked about how she had finished last again in the rope course, and how Junho had made a comment she pretended not to hear. She talked about the food in the station cafeteria, which was edible, but not good, and how she missed certain things from home she couldn't even explain properly. She talked in a low, even voice. Not to perform calm. She was calm. She was just talking. Behind the door, the pacing stopped. Not slowed, stopped. She kept talking for a few more minutes, then said, "Same time tomorrow," and went back upstairs. That was the day Nari saw her coming back up the corridor from the lower stairwell. Nari had been on her way to the equipment room and had taken a wrong turn. She looked at Sue with an expression that Sue's translator didn't have a clean word for, somewhere between confusion and alarm. Where did you come from? Nari asked. Lower level, Sue said. Nari's forearms shifted slightly. Why? Nari asked. Sue shrugged. I was just walking around. Nari looked at the stairwell door behind her, then back at Sue. She did not say anything else. She turned and went the other way. That evening, Nari told Junho. Junho told Bora. Bora mentioned it to Daeho the next morning. Daeho called Sue into his office after morning drills. His office was small and neat, with a single window that looked out over the station's outer ring. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at her for a moment before speaking. You have been going to the lower level, he said. Yes, sir, Sue said. The lower level is restricted during off-rotation hours. The first door is open for maintenance access until 22nd hour, Sue said. I have not passed the second door. Daeho studied her. Why are you going there? Sue thought about how to answer honestly without sounding strange. I wanted to hear it, she said. Whatever is in Base 7, I wanted to hear what it actually sounds like without floors in the way. A long pause. Daeho's scaled jaw moved slightly, which Sue had learned meant he was thinking. It is dangerous, he said, even from outside the door. I know. Recruit Nari says you did not appear frightened. I wasn't, Sue said. Another pause, longer this time. Daeho uncrossed his arms and looked out the window. The Vorkai in Base 7 has been alone for 9 years, he said, in a tone that was almost, not quite, but almost, not dismissive. 9 handlers. None of them succeeded. The last 2 did not even last a week. He looked back at her. What makes you think standing outside a door will accomplish anything? I don't know that it will, Sue said. I'm not trying to accomplish something. I just want to see what happens. Daeho looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was a problem he hadn't figured out yet. Do not pass the second door, he said, and do not be late for drills. Yes, sir, she said, and left. She went back that evening, and the evening after, and the one after that. On the 8th day, she heard something new. She had been talking, about nothing in particular, about the stars visible from the outer ring observation deck, about a book she had read once when she was 12, when there was a sound from inside the bay. Not pacing. Not the low, vibrating hum. A different sound entirely, short and quiet, like something settling its weight, like something sitting down close to the door. Sue stopped talking. The silence on the other side of the door was different now, full instead of empty. She sat down on the floor of the corridor, back against the opposite wall, and kept talking, quietly, slowly. No urgency, no performance. She talked for 40 minutes, and the whole time, on the other side of the door, there was that full silence that meant something very large was sitting still and listening. When she finally stood up to leave, she said, "Good night, Ro." She did not hear a response. She had not expected one. But 3 steps down the corridor, she heard the sound again, that short, quiet shift of enormous weight, like an acknowledgement. She didn't turn around. She just walked back upstairs. Nari was waiting at the top of the stairwell. She had, apparently, followed Sue down, and stood listening from far enough back to stay out of sight. When Sue reached the top step, Nari stepped out of the shadows, with an expression that was, for the first time since Sue had arrived, not contemptuous. "It was quiet the whole time you were talking," Nari said. Not a question. "Yes," Sue said. Nari looked at her for a long moment. "That has never happened before," she said quietly. "Not with any handler, not with anyone." Sue nodded. "I know," she said, and walked back toward Bay 9. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel like she had proved something. She felt the way she always felt after those evenings in the corridor, steady and quiet and a little tired in a good way, like something that needed doing was slowly getting done. Back in Bay 9, she lay on her thin mattress and looked at the ceiling. Above her, Bora was already asleep. Across the room, Junho was reading something on a small screen. Unit 7 stood in the corner, in its dormant position, silver face forward. The station hummed around her. Far below, in Bay 7, there was no sound. For the first time in a long time, it was quiet down there. They mocked the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. The drill was supposed to be straightforward. Live scenario combat exercises were run twice a month on Varen Station. They took place in Drill Yard C, a large enclosed training area on the station's middle level, with movable walls, pressure-sensitive floors, and a ceiling high enough for Velhari to stand at full height without ducking. The exercise was designed to test coordination under stress. Recruits worked in paired units, navigating a shifting obstacle layout while simulated threats activated from the walls and floor. Commander Deho ran the briefing that morning. He stood at the front of the room with his arms behind his back and walked through the scenario without any unnecessary detail. 2 teams, 8 recruits each, rotating objectives, standard rules of engagement. He looked at each recruit as he spoke. When his gaze reached Sue, it held for 1 extra second, then moved on. The recruits filed into Drill Yard C in full training gear. Sue was partnered with Nari, which surprised her. Nari had not spoken to her directly since the night at the stairwell, though she had stopped making the small dismissive sounds she used to make when Sue fell behind during physical drills. They stood together at the starting position without talking. Nari checked her gear. Sue checked hers. "Don't fall behind," Nari said. "I'll try," Sue said. The drill started. For the first 12 minutes, it went normally. The wall panel shifted. Simulated targets activated and deactivated. Sue moved faster than she had in the first week. Her body had adjusted to the gravity and the pace more than she had realized. And she hit 3 targets cleanly before Nari had a chance to call them. She didn't say anything, but she adjusted her positioning without being asked, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Then the alarm went off. It was not the drill alarm. The drill alarm was a double-tone, medium pitch. This was different. A single rising tone, high and continuous, the kind that cut through everything and made every biological body in the room go still for half a second before the instincts kicked in. Containment breach, lower level. Everyone in Drill Yard C heard it at the same moment. Everyone looked up at the ceiling, as if looking up would tell them something. The wall panels stopped moving. The simulated targets went dark. For about 3 seconds, the entire drill yard was completely silent. Then the far door opened. It was the maintenance access door on the south wall, a heavy door, built to let equipment in and out of the yard. It opened because its locking mechanism had been disabled from the other side. The metal around the lock was bent inward. The door swung open slowly, and then Ro walked through. Nothing in the room moved. Ro was 12 feet tall when not fully upright. The Vorkai's body was built like a fortress, dark armored plates along the spine and shoulders, 4 thick legs that moved with a silence that seemed wrong for something that large. 2 forelimbs that ended in broad clawed hands, capable of the kind of force that had bent that door lock like soft plastic. 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows of 3, swept the room in a slow arc. The eyes were amber and clear, and enormously intelligent. Ro stepped fully into Drill Yard C and stopped. The recruits scattered, not in a panicked crowd, in the sharp explosive way that people scatter when their body makes a decision before their brain does. Krellians went left and right, pressing against the walls. The Velhari recruits backpedaled fast, their forearms out for balance. Unit 7 and the other Dronai units moved in calculated retreats to the corners, their sensors running hot. Junho ran. He was one of the fastest. He was pressed against the far wall before anyone else had moved 3 steps. Deho did not run. He stood his ground in the center of the yard, which was either brave or something else entirely. He raised his command baton, a long rod that emitted a low-level electromagnetic pulse, used for managing large hostile fauna in emergencies. He activated it. The pulse fired. Ro looked at him. Then Ro took one step forward, and with a single sideways movement of one forelimb, sent a Velhari recruit who had been trying to edge along the wall, sliding across the floor like he weighed nothing. The recruit hit the far wall and slumped, dazed but alive. Ro didn't even look at him. The movement had been casual, incidental, like brushing something out of the way without breaking stride. Deho fired the baton again. Ro turned its head toward him, all 6 eyes focusing, and made a sound, low and rising. The sound Sue had heard through the floors at night, but up close, in an open room, it was something entirely different. It filled the space. It pressed against the walls. Several of the recruits closest to Ro made audible sounds and moved further back. Deho stood his ground. His hands were steady. His face was controlled. But his body was producing what his training couldn't fully suppress: the chemical markers of fear, the biological signals that a Krellian nervous system released under extreme threat. He couldn't stop it. Nobody in that room could stop it. Ro could smell every single one of them. "Everyone out," Deho called, not taking his eyes off Ro. "Emergency evacuation. Move now." Ro's head swung, tracking the movement, and that tracking, the quiet, patient, predatory attention of it, made people move faster and louder, which made Ro more alert, which made people faster and louder again. The cycle was running and accelerating, and there was nothing Deho could do with his baton to slow it down. Sue had not moved. She was standing about 20 feet from Ro, slightly to the left of center. She had not run when the door opened. She had not pressed against a wall. She had simply stopped where she was and watched. Her heart rate had gone up. She was human, not a machine, but it had not spiked into the red zone. She was not calm the way an empty room was calm. She was calm the way a still pond was calm. There was something underneath, but the surface did not break. Ro's head turned toward her. 6 amber eyes focused. Sue met them. She did not look away, but she did not stare aggressively either. She looked the way she always looked, in the corridor outside Base 7, like she was just present, just there. No agenda except being where she was. Ro held still for a moment. The enormous head tilted very slightly to one side. Sue took one slow step forward. The entire room held its breath. She took another step, then another. Ro watched her come. The forelimbs shifted slightly, not pulling back, not raising for a strike, just adjusting. Ro's weight settled back a fraction. Sue stopped about 8 feet away. She looked up, and Ro was, up close, genuinely enormous. The armored plates along its shoulders were each bigger than she was. The amber eyes were the size of her fists. The clawed hands resting on the floor could have closed around her entirely. None of that changed anything about how she was standing or breathing. "Hey," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "You found me." Ro made a sound, short, the same sound she had heard through the door on the 8th evening in the corridor. The one she had decided meant acknowledgement. "It's okay," Sue said. "I'm here." She raised one hand, slowly, palm up. Not a command, not a threat. Just an open hand, offered, like she had done nothing more dangerous than step outside on a cool morning. Ro looked at the hand, looked at her face, then with a slowness that seemed almost deliberate, almost gentle, which was a word nobody who had read the Bay 7 incident reports would have used anywhere near Ro's name. The Vorkai lowered its massive head until it was roughly level with Sue's shoulder, and stopped there. Drill Yard C was absolutely silent. Deho stood in the center of the room, with his command baton at his side, and did not move. Junho was against the wall, with his mouth open. Nari stood near the exit door and stared. Unit 7 sensor array was running at full capacity. Every eye in the room was on the same thing. 12 feet of apex predator still as a stopped clock, with its head bowed beside a human recruit who weighed less than its foreleg. "Come on," Sue said softly. "Let's go back downstairs." She turned and walked toward the south maintenance door. She walked slowly, steadily, without looking back. Ro followed her. They mocked the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. The station went into partial lockdown for 6 hours after the breach. That was standard procedure. A containment failure at the level of a Class A entity required full system review, structural inspection of the affected bay, and an incident report filed within 24 hours to Coalition Command. Daeho spent most of those 6 hours in back-to-back meetings with the station's security chief, the facility engineer, and a senior Coalition officer who had joined the call from 3 systems away, and asked the same question 4 different times in 4 different ways, as if the answer would change. The answer didn't change. A Vorkai rated maximum threat had walked out of its enclosure, entered a live training exercise, and then followed a first-rotation human recruit back to Bay 7 without incident. The recordings confirmed it from 9 different angles. Sue spent those 6 hours in a small room off the medical bay, while a station physician ran a standard post-incident check on her. The physician, a quiet Tharsi female named Rhea, did the scan twice because the results the first time seemed too normal. Blood pressure steady, neural response within baseline, cortisol levels elevated but not spiked. No signs of acute stress response. She looked at Sue over the top of her scanner and said, "You're fine." "I know," Sue said. "You should not be fine," Rhea said, "statistically speaking." Sue didn't say anything to that. She sat on the edge of the exam table and looked at the wall and thought about Ro walking behind her through the corridor, heavy and patient, back down the lower stairwell, through the first door and then the second, back into Bay 7. She had walked in with Ro and stood in the bay for the first time, and it had been nothing like what she expected, and exactly like what she expected at the same time. Big, quiet, smelling of metal and something older and wilder underneath that. Ro had walked to the center of the enclosure and turned around and looked at her, all 6 eyes calm. "I'll come back tomorrow," Sue had said. Then she had walked out and secured the door and gone upstairs to tell Daeho where she had been. Now she sat in the medical room while the station processed the fact of what had happened. And she felt the same thing she had felt walking back through the corridor. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter and more solid. Like a door she had been standing outside of for a long time had finally opened. They called her to a formal review the next morning. The room had more people in it than Sue had expected. Daeho was there, standing at the side rather than the head of the table, which meant he was not running this meeting. The station's security chief was there, a large Velhari named Goyo, who had a reputation for being thorough and difficult. There were 2 Coalition xenobiologists on a split-screen connection, their faces small in the upper corner of the wall display. And in the center seat, present in full holographic projection, was a Coalition fleet commander Sue had never seen before, with 4 rank markers on his collar and the kind of face that had been making difficult decisions for a long time. His name was Hui. He looked at Sue for a moment when she sat down. Then he said, simply, "Tell us what happened, from the beginning." She told them. She started with the library terminal and the photograph and the empty uniforms. She told them about the first evening in the corridor, and the pacing, and the way it slowed on the second day. She told them about sitting on the floor and talking about nothing, and hearing the weight of something very large settle close to the door. She told it plainly and without drama, because that was how it had happened. Plainly and without drama, one small thing after another. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. One of the xenobiologists spoke first. He had been making notes the entire time she talked. "The behavioral pattern you're describing," he said, "is consistent with bonding approach behavior in solitary apex-class species. The slowing of movement in response to a non-threatening presence. The proximity orientation. The voluntary following behavior." He looked at his notes. "We theorized this was possible with Vorkai, but we have never seen it confirmed. Every attempt has failed, because the approach was wrong." He looked at Sue. "Every handler we assigned produced biological fear markers. The Vorkai read those markers as prey behavior or as dominance challenge, depending on the individual. Both responses triggered aggression or withdrawal." "I don't produce fear markers," Sue said. "Not the same way. Humans have them, but our baseline is different. We evolved surrounded by things that could kill us. We learned to function with them present." "That is an oversimplification," the second xenobiologist said. "Yes," Sue said, "but it's also basically what happened." A pause. Fleet Commander Hui looked at her steadily. "What you are describing," he said, "is not a skill that can be trained. It is not a technique. It is something your species carries as a biological baseline." "That's one way to put it," Sue said. Hui nodded slowly. He looked at Deho. Deho said nothing. His expression was something Sue had not seen on his face before. Not dismissive, not amused. Something that looked, from certain angles, like reassessment. "I have a question," Sue said. Hui looked at her. In this room, at this table, with these ranks and these screens, the fact that she asked a question without being invited to was notable. Nobody said so out loud. "Go ahead," Hui said. "What happens to Ro now?" she asked. Another pause. Hui glanced at the xenobiologists, then back. "That is part of what this review is determining," he said. "The enclosure was compromised. The breach protocol failed. We need to—" "I'm asking what happens to Ro," Sue said. "Not the enclosure. Not the protocol." She kept her voice level. "Ro has been alone in that bay for 9 years. Every handler left or was pulled. The automated systems fed it, and the cameras watched it, and nobody ever actually stayed. And now, something changed. I'm asking if that something is going to be maintained, or if Ro goes back to being managed by sensors and automated feeding, and nobody ever going near the door." The room was quiet. Hui looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of someone encountering a variable they had not accounted for. "What are you proposing?" he said. Sue had thought about this. She had thought about it during the 6 hours in the medical bay and through the night after, lying on her thin mattress while the station hummed. "The Coalition has an Apex Liaison program," she said. "It hasn't had a candidate in 30 years. I looked it up." She paused. "I'm proposing that it has one now." Silence. Then Deho made a sound. It was a short sound, and it was not laughter. It was the Krellian equivalent of something between surprise and what might, in a being less formal, have come out as a laugh that could not quite believe itself. The xenobiologists were both looking at her with the sharp, focused attention of people who had just realized they were in a more interesting meeting than they had thought. "You have been on this station for less than 4 weeks, Hui said. "You are a first-rotation recruit." "Yes," Sue said. "You are proposing a program transfer to one of the most demanding and historically unsuccessful roles in the Coalition Xenofauna Division." "Yes," Sue said. "And your reasoning," Hui said, "is that you talked to an apex predator through a door for 3 weeks, and it followed you out of a containment breach." "It also didn't hurt anyone," Sue said. "It could have. It didn't." She paused. Hui looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Deho. Deho met his gaze and said, in a tone that was careful and measured, and not quite the same tone he had used in any conversation with Sue before, "I would not recommend against it." From Deho in that room, that was not a small thing. Hui turned back to Sue. He picked up a stylus and made a note on his console. The review will take 5 days, he said. You will remain on standard recruit status until a determination is made. He paused. You are dismissed, Recruit Sue. She stood. Thank you, sir. She walked out of the room. In the corridor outside, she stood for a moment and breathed the cold, recycled station air. Somewhere far below, in Bay 7, Ro was doing whatever Ro did on an ordinary morning. Pacing, maybe, or sitting still, or pressing one enormous forelimb against the glass wall that looked out on an empty corridor. Waiting, the way Ro had always been waiting. For something that wasn't afraid. 5 days later, the determination came back. Approved. Transfer to the Apex Liaison Program effective immediately. Ro would be transferred with her to the Coalition Xenofauna Research Station, where proper facilities would be built, not to contain, but to work. Sue packed her bag. It took about 10 minutes. She picked up her keycard and her orders and her jacket, and she stopped at the door of Bay 9 and looked back at it. The metal bunks, the dented locker, the thin mattress, the ventilation shaft that hummed all night. Junho was sitting on his bunk, reading. He glanced up when she paused at the door. He did not say anything, but he nodded. She nodded back and left. On the way down to Bay 7, she passed Nari in the corridor. Nari stopped. She looked at Sue for a moment, at her bag, at her orders, at her face. Then she said something in Velhari that Sue's translator rendered as, "You were never the weakest one here." Sue thought about that. "I know," she said. "I just had to wait for everyone else to figure that out." Nari made a sound that was, unmistakably, a short laugh. Then she walked on. Sue went down the lower stairwell, through the first door, through the second, and into Bay 7. Ro was at the near end of the enclosure. All 6 amber eyes found her immediately. The enormous head tilted. "We're leaving," Sue said. "Both of us." She opened the enclosure. They walked out together.